Steam hissed from the locomotive in slow, angry bursts, curling through the rafters of Liverpool Street Station like it had a mind of its own. The smell of coal and wet stone clung to everything, the air, the coats, the gloves of strangers jostling past me. I was about to step onto the platform for the Paris Express when Marjorie leaned close, so close I could feel the warmth of her breath on my cheek, and said, "You're a mistake. Mother never wanted you." Her words slid into me like a stiletto blade, thin, precise, and meant to leave no visible wound. For a moment, the chatter of the crowd vanished. My hand tightened around the ticket in my pocket, the edges biting into my skin. The station bell rang somewhere far off, but it felt muted, distant, as though the world had decided to pause for my humiliation. I turned to face her. Marjorie, in her camel coat and matching cloche hat, looked every bit the society darling she had worked so hard to become. Her rouge was perfect, her curls framed just right under the brim, her lips curved into a smile that wasn't a smile at all. And in that moment, I remembered why my mother had always favored her. She had mastered the art of appearing blameless while twisting the knife. But she didn't know that I had something that could snap her porcelain world in half. I thought of the man in the grey fedora I'd seen her with 2 nights ago, his hand lingering far too long on her back as they slipped into the Ritz. I thought of the envelope I had found tucked into her vanity drawer, a hotel bill from Brighton, signed Henry. She straightened her gloves, preparing to walk past me toward the platform, as if her venom was just a passing remark, as casual as commenting on the weather. Steam swirled between us, but I stepped forward, blocking her path. "You've always wanted the last word, Marjorie," I said, keeping my voice low enough that she'd have to lean in. "But so have I, and I'm about to take it." For the first time in years, her smile faltered. Marjorie's eyes narrowed, a flash of warning buried in their cool grey. She adjusted the tilt of her hat, as though the entire platform were a stage and she must remain composed for her invisible audience. But I'd learned long ago that composure was her armor, and armor could be cracked. I let my gaze drift over her from head to toe, the fine wool coat that hugged her waist, the silk scarf knotted with care, the faint perfume of jasmine clinging stubbornly in the damp air. She looked like she belonged in a magazine illustration, untouched by the soot and damp of the station. But all I could see were the cracks beneath the gloss. We had been raised under the same roof, but in entirely different climates. I was the dutiful daughter, born without expectation of beauty or charm, while Marjorie was the sunbeam, every frown forgiven, every misstep overlooked. I could still hear our mother's voice from that long-ago evening when the porcelain vase shattered on the parlor floor. "It's all right, darling, accidents happen." The same evening I was sent to my room without supper for denying I'd done it. Her lips parted, perhaps to soften the sting of her earlier words, perhaps to press for one more. But I didn't give her the chance. "You're clever, Marjorie," I murmured, "but you've grown careless." Her brows lifted ever so slightly, though her body stilled, the faintest sign that my arrow had found its mark. From the corner of my eye, I caught sight of a figure in the crowd, tall, dark-haired, wearing that familiar grey fedora. He lingered near a column, pretending to check his watch, but his gaze flickered repeatedly in our direction. Henry. My stomach tightened. This was no chance encounter. Marjorie noticed him too. A quick glance, so brief that anyone else might have missed it, but I'd spent my life studying my sister's every calculated move. And in that fleeting exchange, I saw it all. The arrangement, the secrecy, the risk. She had come here not just to wound me, but to meet him. I smiled then, and it wasn't the smile she was used to. Steam gusted across the platform again, veiling Henry's face before clearing in a lazy swirl. He stood as though he belonged to another world, polished leather shoes, pressed overcoat, a presence that carried an unspoken confidence. Yet his eyes betrayed him. They darted to Marjorie with the quick hunger of a man who feared being seen and desired it in the same breath. For a moment, I almost admired his nerve. To meet her here in the open, knowing Edward would be arriving within minutes, it was bold but also reckless. That recklessness was precisely the thread I could pull to unravel them both. My gloved hands itched, the paper of my ticket crumpling inside my palm. Marjorie spoke, her voice low and urgent. "Don't you dare!" She meant more than my presence here. She meant my knowledge, my proof. But her warning only tightened my resolve. I glanced past her, watching Henry shift his weight, glancing over his shoulder as though expecting someone else. I remembered the first time I heard his name, muffled through the door of her dressing room as she spoke into the telephone. "No, Henry, I can't. Not yet," she'd said, her voice tremulous in a way it never was with me. Weeks later, I found the hotel receipt tucked into her coat pocket, the ink still smelling faintly of salt air from Brighton. The crowd between us surged as another train arrived, the clatter of wheels on tracks drowning out every other sound. But Henry stayed where he was, rooted to the spot, watching her. He was waiting for the signal, some subtle movement from her to say it was safe. I stepped aside just enough for him to see my face. The moment his eyes met mine, I let a slow, deliberate smile spread across my lips. His expression changed, the faintest flicker of recognition, followed by unease. He knew. He knew I wasn't supposed to be here, and that was when I decided I wasn't going to Paris today. Marjorie took a half-step toward Henry, but I moved with her, cutting off her path with a deliberate turn of my body. The clack of heels and the rustle of overcoats filled the air, but between us there was only the sound of her quickened breathing. Her eyes darted to the clock overhead, 2 minutes to the Paris Express. The whistle would blow soon, and the station's rhythm would change. Once the train pulled out, the moment would vanish into the fog. She needed to reach Henry now before Edward arrived, and I could feel her desperation humming like an exposed wire. "You wouldn't," she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. She wanted to believe I was still the quiet, obedient sister who swallowed her words and let her get away with everything. But I had already stepped off that ledge in my mind. I leaned closer, my tone steady, almost conversational. "Do you want me to tell them, or should you?" My glance slid deliberately toward Henry. His jaw tightened, his hands disappearing into his coat pockets. A man like that never liked being cornered. It made him unpredictable. Marjorie's chin lifted, defiance sharpening her features. "You'd ruin your own name too," she hissed, but her eyes betrayed the calculation behind her words. She wasn't trying to save me from scandal. She was gambling I wouldn't be willing to share it. Steam curled upward from the engine, and in the hiss I heard the answer I'd been waiting for. I didn't care about my name anymore. I cared about the truth, and the satisfaction of letting it breathe in the open air. The moment came with the shrill blast of the train's whistle. People shifted, tightening their grips on bags and children, eyes on the conductor's signals, the perfect cover for a single voice to cut through the din. "Funny thing," I said, pitching my tone just high enough to carry, "seeing you here with Henry, Marjorie." Several heads turned, curiosity peaked like moths to a sudden flame. The name hung in the air, alien to most, but not to her. I watched the color drain from her cheeks, leaving the rouge standing out like paint on porcelain. Henry froze. Even from a distance, I saw his shoulders tense, his body leaning ever so slightly backward toward the fog, as if retreat might still be possible. But I wasn't finished. "Should I explain to Edward why you're traveling together?" I asked, my voice sweet as tea laced with arsenic. A murmur spread through the onlookers, whispers slipping between strangers who only moments ago had been thinking about timetables and tickets. I could feel the crowd turning, drawn into the gravity of our spectacle. Marjorie tried to laugh, a brittle staccato sound that fooled no one. "Ruth, you're being ridiculous," she said, but her gloved hands fidgeted, betraying her nerves. The station air seemed suddenly sharper, colder, alive with the scent of coal smoke and scandal. It happened the way storms form, slow at first, then all at once. People edged closer, the shuffle of their shoes against the wet platform blending into a low hum. Their eyes flicked between us like spectators waiting for a punch in a prize fight. I felt their attention like heat on my skin. Some looked scandalized, others intrigued, but all were invested now. Marjorie's hand went to her scarf, adjusting it as if that small motion could restore control. Her voice, low and urgent, slipped out between clenched teeth. "You've gone too far." "Not nearly far enough," I replied, keeping my tone calm, almost conversational, the sort of voice that made listeners lean in. Henry was still there, his fedora brim casting his face in shadow, though his jaw worked like a man grinding his teeth to powder. Steam hissed again from the engine, wrapping us in a damp veil. It made everything feel smaller, more intimate, though the audience around us had doubled in size. The woman to my left clutched her pearls. The man behind her muttered something to his companion, eyes never leaving Marjorie. She tried to step sideways, angling toward Henry, but I mirrored her movement perfectly. "Going somewhere?" I asked, my smile more like a blade. Her nostrils flared. She knew the trap was tightening. Far down the platform, I spotted Edward, tall, composed, scanning the crowd. He hadn't yet seen us, but when he did, the real damage would begin. And for the first time in years, I wanted him to. Edward's figure emerged through the steam like a photograph developing in slow motion. Crisp, dark suit, polished shoes, the measured stride of a man used to commanding attention. He carried himself with the quiet assurance of someone who had never been blindsided in public, until now. "Edward," I called, my voice cutting through the clamor of the station like a church bell in the fog. His head lifted and his eyes found mine, first curious, then narrowing as they took in Marjorie beside me. Marjorie moved quickly, stepping toward him with an airy, rehearsed smile. "Darling, she began, but I didn't let her finish. "Your wife's been keeping secrets," I said, each word clean and deliberate. A silence fell, sudden and unnatural. Even the bustle of the platform seemed to pause, as though the station itself had stopped to listen. I turned slightly, angling my body so Edward could see past me, to the man in the grey fedora lingering at the edge of the crowd. Henry froze in place, but it was too late. Edward's gaze locked on him with the precision of a rifle sight. The flicker of recognition in Edward's eyes told me everything. He knew who Henry was. Perhaps he had known all along. Marjorie's voice climbed higher, desperate now. "It isn't what you think," she said, reaching for Edward's arm. But he didn't take it. He simply stood there, studying her with a stillness that felt more dangerous than shouting. I'd expected shock, maybe fury. What I saw instead was calculation. The bell tolled for final boarding, a hollow clang that seemed to vibrate through the soles of my boots. Steam swelled around us, a moving curtain that only made the onlookers press in tighter, eager to see the next act. Marjorie's hand stayed on Edward's sleeve, but her voice faltered. "Please let me explain." Her tone lacked its usual polish, every syllable slightly frayed. I had never seen her like this, stripped of her control, of the unshakable poise she wore like perfume. Edward's gaze slid past her, over my shoulder, and toward Henry. In that frozen moment, the two men seemed to communicate without a word. Henry's eyes hardened. Edward's remained unreadable. Then, with a slow precision, Edward stepped past Marjorie without touching her. He mounted the train steps, his polished shoe landing with a sharp final click on the metal tread. No backward glance, no parting word, just the quiet rejection of a man removing something from his life without ceremony. Marjorie stood alone, framed in the white plume of steam that the engine breathed over her. Around us, the crowd began to dissolve, their appetite for drama momentarily sated. A child tugged at his mother's hand. A porter called out for luggage. I felt no triumph, only an emptiness that was somehow heavier than before. The whistle screamed, the train began to move, and Edward disappeared into the blur of carriages. Henry was already gone, and Marjorie, my beautiful, terrible sister, looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. It arrived 3 days later, slid beneath my door with the Morning Post, cream paper, my name written in Marjorie's practiced looping hand. I knew before I opened it that it would not be an apology. The first line confirmed it. "You've destroyed my life. I'll never forgive you." There was no greeting, no softening, just venom, poured neatly onto the page in blue ink. I could almost hear her voice, cool and clipped, as if she were delivering the words in person over tea. I read no further. The paper crumpled in my hand with a dry whisper, the corners digging into my palm like teeth. I tossed it onto the grate, where last night's embers still smouldered, and watched the flames lick it into curling ash. But her words didn't burn away so easily in my mind, destroyed my life. The phrase played over itself, twisting into something that no longer sounded like victory. I remembered the two of us as children, racing down the garden path in the summer twilight, our laughter rising above the hum of bees. I had loved her once, before the years grew sharp between us. The guilt was slow to arrive, but once it came, it sat heavy on my chest. I told myself she had earned the truth being spoken aloud, but the truth is never as clean as we want it to be. Sometimes it stains the one who tells it just as much as the one it's about. By nightfall, I found myself staring out the window toward the street lamps, wondering where she was sleeping now, and whether she had anyone left to speak her name without anger. The telegram came months later in early spring, when the city smelled faintly of wet stone and blooming lilacs. It was brief, impersonal, the kind of message meant to inform, not to console. Henry Latham arrested for fraud. Connection to Edward Harper confirmed. I read it twice, the words shifting in meaning with each pass. Edward hadn't been blindsided at the station that morning. He had been waiting. He'd known about Marjorie and Henry for months, perhaps longer, and had let the affair run its course to serve his own ends. Henry's fraud, the telegram said, had siphoned thousands from Edward's company. The affair had been Edward's lever, the weapon he needed to corner Henry without ever dirtying his own hands. And I had been the unwitting accomplice, the one to detonate the final charge in public. Marjorie hadn't just lost her husband that day. She had been maneuvered out of her marriage, her lover, and her safety in one swift, calculated move. My outburst had sealed the trap Edward had built. I sat there for a long while, the telegram limp in my fingers, the kettle hissing faintly on the stove. I had thought I was claiming justice, or at least retribution, for a lifetime of slights, but I was never the real player, just a piece moved across the board at the right moment. Outside, the wind pushed steam from a passing train into the street. It curled upward into the grey sky, vanishing like every word I'd spoken that morning on the platform. And for the first time since that day, I wished I'd stayed silent. If you've been gripped by this tale of betrayal, secrets, and the twists hiding in the steam, don't vanish into the fog just yet. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that will leave you breathless. And if this one kept you on the edge of your seat, give the video a like. It tells us you're ready for more. The next train is coming. Will you be on it?